Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be going over my top draft tips for the 2022 fantasy football season. Inside today's video, I'll be giving you guys 11 different tips that I believe are going to help you guys dominate your 2022 fantasy football drafts. But before we could get on into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help us out a ton. And if you would like to follow me on Twitter, please do so at Notorious FNTSY. So without further ado, let's get into my top 11 draft tips for the 2022 fantasy football season. We'll begin with my number one tip, and that is going to be that you need to understand the rules of your league. You need to know if it is going to be a half PPR league, a full PPR league, a standard league, and now there's this new idea called tiered PPR, where maybe a running back gets half PPR, a receiver gets full PPR, and a tight end gets 1.5 PPR. There's tight end premium leagues. There are a lot of new rules that people are incorporating into their leagues. Now, obviously, that is not the standard, right? Not everyone plays in tiered PPR, but understanding if you're playing half PPR, PPR, or if you're stuck in the Stone Age playing standard is very important to understanding which players you are going to want to draft, and you don't want to really figure out if you're in these kind of leagues the day of, right? You want to know in advance so you can prepare correctly. You need to understand how many players you are starting at each position. Is it one quarterback, two running backs, two receivers, a tight end, and a flex? Is it maybe one quarterback, two running backs, three receivers, a tight end, a flex? Are there multiple flexes? There are now leagues getting more popular where there's super flex, where you can start a quarterback at one of your flex spots, and there's two quarterback leagues. There are also some other settings as well, like point per first down. There are other settings that you need to make sure that you know. You need to make sure that you take a very good look at your league settings before you go into the draft, because if you figure out after the draft that, oh, wow, this league was tight end premium, and you waited to draft a tight end, and maybe you would have preferred to draft one earlier on if you knew that, make sure you know these things. Make sure you know all of the settings of your league, because they can drastically change how you want to approach the draft. My second tip is to do the research. You got to do the research. You have to prepare for your fantasy football drafts. You wouldn't show up to a job interview not knowing what job you're interviewing for. So you're not going to want to go to your fantasy football draft without preparing and understanding who the players are. Now, that is one of the bigger key pieces to doing the research, is actually knowing every single player in the draft and understanding what team they're on, the situation they are in, and where they sit in the depth chart. Don't be using a magazine. You don't use a magazine to crank off anymore, right? This isn't the 1970s. So don't use a magazine to do your fantasy football draft. Use updated rankings, and don't focus too much on how a player finished last season. Where they finished isn't necessarily where they're going to finish this season, and where they finished doesn't even necessarily tell the whole story of their season. When you're looking at players' performances from 2021, I think you should be looking at their points per game numbers, because to me, the points per game numbers are more accurate to how they actually played on the season, because it shows you how good they were on a game-to-game basis. My next tip number 3, is going to be to utilize mock drafts and best ball drafts. You can figure out how trends are going to work inside of your draft by doing this, and you are going to be able to get comfortable in your draft spot. In a lot of leagues, you guys are going to be knowing where you are drafting prior to the draft. Now, not every league is like that. Some leagues, they randomize the draft order 30 minutes, an hour prior to your draft. So in that situation, you just want to be trying to do mock drafts, best ball drafts from every single situation, every single pick inside of the draft. This makes it a lot easier for you guys to pivot during the draft, because if someone snipes you, then you're not sitting there panicking, worrying about on who you are going to pick. You already know that if you get sniped in this position, there are a couple of other players you like in that area. So mock drafting really helps you stay calm during the draft. And it also allows you to try out different strategies. You can try out the, hey, maybe we do early quarterback in this draft. Now, I'm not personally someone who loves drafting quarterbacks early unless you're in a super flex league. But hey, let's try out drafting Josh Allen in the 3rd round and let's see how my team looks. Or hey, let's try not going wide receiver early. Maybe we don't draft a wide receiver in the first 3 rounds and we look up to go bolster running back, robust running back, draft 3 running backs off the rip. Or maybe you want to do 0 running back. Don't draft a running back at all for the first couple of rounds. Or you want to start the draft with a tight end early. You want to try to do a bunch of different strategies and see which team you like the best. Now, obviously, is your mock draft going to go exactly how your fantasy football draft is going to go? No, but practice makes perfect, and practicing is going to help you out a ton, and that also goes with best ball drafts because people are putting up their money to do these drafts, so they are even a little bit more accurate when compared to a mock draft. My 4th tip for you guys is going to be not to go into the draft with a set strategy. Now, we did just talk about a couple of things you can do in your mock draft to try out these different strategies, but don't go into the draft thinking, I must draft 3 running backs in the first 5 rounds, or I need to draft a wide receiver in the 1st round, then draft a running back, then draft a wide receiver, and then draft a tight end in the 4th round. Because in that scenario, the scenario I just outlined, say you get to the 4th round, and now all the big tight ends are gone. All those guys you liked at the tight end position are gone. Now, since you put yourself in this metaphorical box, now you have to draft a tight end, and you're fucking reaching. So do not go into the draft with a set strategy. Let the draft fall to you. Let the draft be molded. Let your team be molded by how the draft is going. Don't just go in there thinking you must do certain things in certain rounds, because then you are going to put yourself in a very bad situation. My 5th tip is going to be to draft using tiers, not just a list. Have each position in tiers and draft based upon that, not just some huge 300 player list of where it's running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, quarterbacks, all combined with the kickers and the defenses. Don't be doing that. You need to have them ranked by positions. You want a quarterbacks list, a running back list, a wide receiver list, a tight end list, defense list, kicker list, and it makes it a lot easier to cross things off, and it also makes it a lot easier to see when there is a value positional drop-off. If you say have a lot of running backs still available in the first tier of running backs, and there is only 1 wide receiver left, then maybe you want to take that wide receiver because there is a chance that the running backs could fall back to you in that tier. You want to make sure that you are drafting based upon tiers. It makes it a lot easier to figure out when a position is depleting, and it makes it a lot easier, in my opinion, to draft based upon value. My next tip, my 6th tip, is going to be to draft more running backs than wide receivers. In week 3, if your wide receiver goes down, to find a wide receiver that you can play than it is to draft a running back. It is very easy every single week. I just use week 3 as an example to find a waiver wire wide receiver that you can start. It is almost impossible, unless there's an injury, to find a running back off of the waiver wire in most leagues that you can start, unless you're in like an 8-team league. So it is very important, in my opinion, to draft more running backs than wide receivers. This is not the case in best ball leagues, but in redraft fantasy football leagues, you need to be drafting more running backs than wide receivers. If you find that late round running back that hits, that running back that climbs up the depth chart really quick in the season, starts playing, that could be the golden ticket, metaphorically, to your team's success. So please make sure that you're drafting more running backs than wide receivers, unless your league setup is like you got to start 5 receivers every week and 1 running back. Then obviously you got to do things different. But talking about a normal setup league, you need to be drafting more running backs, in my opinion, than wide receivers. The next tip is going to be to wait on quarterbacks unless there is value. Every single year, the quarterback pool is super deep. Quarterbacks that aren't even drafted in your league will very likely have top 10, 12, 14 weeks multiple times throughout the season. Now, obviously, a guy like Drew Lock or Geno Smith or something, I don't think that's going to happen, but there is potential that one of them pops off a couple of weeks on the season. So you don't necessarily have to reach all the way up the board and take Patrick Mahomes, take a guy like Josh Allen, who, again, I think those are 2 fantastic quarterbacks. I think they could be the best quarterback in all of fantasy football, either of those guys. But I think that drafting one early in a normal 1 quarterback league definitely lessens your depth at the skill positions. So it's very important for me personally in most drafts to wait on quarterback. But again, the note is wait on quarterback unless there is value. Because sometimes there are a lot of people in your draft that are thinking just like me, thinking just like you, and are like, oh, I'm going to wait for a quarterback. And then Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes screeches down the draft board. And maybe you get them in the 5th round. And at that point, bam, I'm clicking the draft button on Josh Allen because I feel confident in their ability to be the number 1 quarterback. And now they have fallen multiple rounds. So I like drafting them at the value. Before we get on into my next tip, I would like to give you guys a quick word from our friends, our sponsor of today's video, and that is going to be Underdog Fantasy, and they kind of go hand in hand with today's video because I talked about doing best ball drafts and mock drafts. The best place to do best ball drafts, in my opinion, is Underdog Fantasy. Best Ball Mania 3, their new tournament, has $10 million in total prize money. And all you got to do is draft the team, and that's it. There's no waivers, no trades, no in-season management. All you got to do is draft your team, and then Underdog will automatically put your highest scores into your lineup every single week. So you don't even have to edit your lineup. You just draft it, and you can forget about it, and then you show up in January, and you're like, wow, I won a lot of money. Or maybe you want to watch it every single week. That's okay as well. You can monitor your team throughout the season as well. But again, you don't even have to pick anyone up. There's no trades. There's no worrying about calling fucking Jenny from the office and trying to get her to trade you a player, right? There's no trades, no in-season management. All you got to do is draft the team. And you might be thinking, Nick, I wait to do my normal fantasy football drafts, my redraft drafts until August. And that makes sense. But last year's Best Ball Mania champion, the winner of Best Ball Mania last year, drafted their team in June. So there really is no need to wait, and you can draft today. Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. So if you deposit $100, you'll be getting an additional $100. That's $200 total dollars for just depositing $100 when you use promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, and that's good for 4 entries into the Best Ball Mania 3 tournament. So back on into the video. My next tip is going to be to wait on kicker and defense. This goes basically hand in hand yet again with the quarterback tip because drafting a kicker or defense early on hinders the amount of depth that you can build for your roster. Having an amazing defense doesn't even mean that that defense is going to be good every single week because they are going to have tough matchups. There's going to be games where that number 1 defense plays up against one of the best offenses and they get their ass handed to them. So, in my opinion, the best way to handle the defense position is by playing the matchup. And the same thing goes with the kicker position. You can play the matchups every single week, find the matchups that you like, and stream the kicker and defense position. You can just drop your kicker, your defense, and switch them out. Now, there are some leagues where this may not be as advantageous, so I want to put a caution marker on this because there are some leagues that limit the amount of moves you can make on the waiver wire on the season. Some leagues limit you to only 30 moves. Now, if you're in a league like that, you need to tell the commissioner that that's a fucking stupid rule, but that is a rule that some leagues have, so make sure you understand that as well. The next tip is going to be to look at the other teams drafting around you. How are they making their selection? Which players at what position do they need? So say you're drafting next to a team that doesn't have a quarterback and you don't have your quarterback and they go right after you. Maybe you want to take your quarterback now so that by the time it comes back to you, the quarterback may not have been there because they need to take a quarterback. So make sure that you pay attention to what positions the teams have around you. It makes it very easy to decide which position you will actually pick because you can figure out which position is going to fall back to you in the draft. The next tip, before we get to the final tip, tip number 11, is to write down your team to know the buys and positions on your team. Now, I understand that it says on the screen in some of your drafts. This is probably a more important tip if you are doing an in-person draft, a live draft, but make sure you write these things down because it might be easier to see on your paper compared to on your screen which positions you have and the bye weeks. Now, in terms of running backs, wide receivers, I'm not really too worried about the bye week. But if you're drafting 2 quarterbacks, you don't want to draft 2 quarterbacks on bye number 9 because guess what? You come to week number 9 and now you don't have a fucking quarterback. So make sure you pay attention at the quarterback and the tight end position. If you're going to draft 2, that they have 2 different buys. That is very important so that you have a quarterback to play that week and you have a tight end to play that week. And again, if you're in a live draft, this is paramount. You need to be doing this. Otherwise, you may not be able to follow your team because it's not like you're sitting right up next to the screen or right next to the board when you're drafting, right? You're probably pretty far away and it might be hard to see. So make sure that you are writing down your team and including the buys when you're writing them down. The final tip of today's video, we're moving to the final tip. It's going to be to try not to panic. It will be hard to stay calm in a lot of situations. It is, because shit happens, you get sniped, and you're like, oh man, I'm fucking panicking. You're looking like what is that painting called with guys like this, you know what I'm talking about? That painting, you're starting to look like that. You're like, oh fuck, I'm not going to get this player, and then you start to panic. Do not panic. If you prepared correctly, you won't panic. If you follow these tips, you're likely to not panic. Make sure you look when you're 6 picks away. Who are the guys that I want? Who are the players that I want when it is my turn to be up? And then you're not going to shit yourself. You're not going to worry. So make sure you're paying attention. Stay locked in during the draft. Now, you can drink a bunch. I drink a lot during my drafts because it's fun. And then you can start yelling at your friends, blah, blah, blah. It's very fun. But make sure you're at least paying attention. Make sure you're not going to go take a leak when you're 3 picks away, right? Make sure you're paying attention. Make sure to stay locked in. And the most important tip, additional tip number 12, have fun. Make sure that you have fun, because while you're looking to win some money, while you're looking to do all these things, make sure that you have fun. Because at the end of the day, even if you have a bad fantasy season, you might still have a fun time drafting your team, and you could still have a fun time watching your team play all season long. So thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. If you did end up enjoying, make sure you hit that like button as well as that subscribe button down below. Make sure you check out Underdog Fantasy. Promo code Awesemo will double your first deposit up to $100. I love you guys all so much. I hope you have a great rest of your guys' day. And as always, guys, goodbye.